Alright, so several years ago, I bought and received a job lot of early Thomas and Friends videos and the like from an eBay seller. The auction's description mentioned that several of the videos were given to him prior to the release of the series on VHS, implying that the seller originally worked on the show in some way. Some of the early tapes he sent me were in good condition, considering they're almost 30 years old, and some are a little worse for wear with missing boxes, labels, etc. Some of the tapes had the original labels missing and had crudely written replacement labels stuck to them. Other tapes had early versions of certain episodes with extra or missing sound effects, as well as short bits of footage that did not make it to the final versions of the episodes. The video that grabbed my interest the most, however, was a video simply called Early Reel, which I believe was filmed in the early 1980s, along with the original Down the Mine pitch pilot episode. Now, Down the Mine was pitched to ITV before filming on the series properly began. Once it was greenlighted, Series 1 of Thomas and Friends was produced, and Down the Mine was reshot to become the show's 25th episode, meaning that this video could have not been brought cross-pitch to the ITV network to get the show greenlit. Intrigued, I played the video before any of the others I received in the job lot. The video started with a date displayed in the bottom right-hand corner. It only appeared for a few seconds and said 5/6/1981, which would mean the 5th of June 1981. According to most sources, 1981 was the year filming began on the show. After this, the title card appeared, as this was one of the earliest, if not the earliest, Thomas videos to be completed. It made sense that the familiar theme tune, along with the famous scenes of Thomas bypassing a windmill and stopping at Farquhar Station, were absent. Instead, a relatively plain title card was used, simply displaying the classic Thomas symbol shown at the end of all Series 1 and 2 episodes. After a few seconds, it faded to black. Ringo Starr was not present as the narrator. In fact, there was no narrator. The video contained no speech, merely sound effects, making it all the more unnerving. The episode started out with Knapford Station being completely mobbed, as trains populating virtually every platform, as only 7 engines were featured in the first season. It's likely that 1 or 2 unmodified Markland engines were pulling some of the trains. A goods train, or trucks full of stone, was present in the goods platform, which was the platform closest to the viewer. The camera zoomed in to look more closely at the goods train, and then we see Thomas slowly back down on the train. Thomas's model looked off in this early reel. It was presumably the same model as the one used in the Down the Mine pitch, which is visible in a single scene in the broadcast version. Thomas's sidewards were chunkier than the TV series model. His wheels were also slightly smaller and his running plate was lower, obscuring part of his wheels. The thing I found creepy is that the engine's eyes didn't move in this at all. They were painted on, very much like the Troublesome Trucks and characters like Terrence and Caroline. So Thomas, with his lifeless eyes, pulled out of the station and onto the open line. The puffing noise in this video was more realistic, as if recorded from a real steam locomotive. Further down the line, Thomas passed Percy. Again, his model was noticeably different to his model in the show. His tanks were less rounded and his whole look had a more industrial feel about it, similar to how he looked in some of the later Railway series books. As the 2 engines passed each other, they whistled, their whistle sounding pretty much the same as they do on the show. Immediately following this, Thomas got sent down the wrong line. We saw a shot of Thomas rolling down the wrong line with a shocked look on his face. It looked similar to the one on the show, except it was more detailed and seemed to convey more horror, as if Thomas was severely loathing the thought of what was to come. I saw Thomas roll down a steep gradient with the truck surging against him. The shocked face from the last scene was still present. A level crossing was ahead of Thomas, which he immediately ran into and broke. To make matters worse, a car was on the level crossing at that point in time, which Thomas rammed into, sending it tumbling out of control. A semi-mountainous set similar to the one from Thomas in Trouble was seen with Thomas in the far distance. The difference is that there was more rocks, ridges and cliffs and less grass. A pair of derailed trucks were present on the line in front of Thomas. Thomas, unable to stop, smashed into the derailed trucks and flew off the rails. Thomas continued to roll on the ground. A thin piece of string was visible in a few scenes, until he tumbled off a rocky ledge. He fell all the way down the mountain cliff with a more unsettling face. It was similar to his eyes shut face from the show, but conveyed intense fear and his teeth were gritted. While this was going on, a climactic orchestral piece was heard, which was more than likely to be a piece of stock music. Thomas reached the bottom of the mountain and crashed into the rocky ground below. A terrible metallic crash could be heard, while Thomas's body shell exploded on contact with the ground, with bits such as whistles and handrails flying in several directions. A sinner sound explosion sound effect was added for a more dramatic effect. Even worse than this was a pair of male voices letting up blood-curdling shrieks, which I assume were Thomas's driver and fireman either being killed or badly injured by the crash. As the crash died down, the camera panned and I saw some of Thomas's remains, including the upturned exploded body shell, as an ominous string piece, again probably stock music, was played. The face was gone, faded to a smokebox door. Flames were around the broken pieces of Thomas, and a broken down train could be faintly seen in one shot, appearing to be coupled to Percy, whose face was obscured by its cab. You could faintly hear a male voice saying the Latin sentence, Feliciter est nemo nocere. Slowly, then the scene faded to black. On the black background, some text in white read, "There's nothing quite like it," below the middle of the screen, in Rockwell. In the Railway series, this "There's nothing quite like it" was the motto of the Northwestern Railway, the railway featured in the books and the TV show. Following this was a copyright notice of a Clearwater Features production for Britt Alcroft Limited, copyright Britt Alcroft Thomas Limited, 1981. While the copyright date was displayed, the faint sound of steam hissing was audible, along with a faint yet shrill-sounding steam whistle, which sounded like a more realistic version of Thomas's whistle. The screen remained blank for about 30 seconds. Slowly, it then faded to a night scene. The colors were very washed out at this point. A rusty engine with Thomas's shape could be seen rolling under its own power along a run-down branch line. I could only assume that the engine was a ghost Thomas or something similar. The Thomas figure no longer had a face, but instead a regular smokebox door. The smokebox door wasn't secure though, so it kept banging against Thomas's smokebox. Each time the door opened, there was some sort of substance that was faintly visible inside. I initially assumed this to be ash, but upon closer inspection, it looked like some sort of rotting flesh. I still like to think it's ash, however. Throughout these night scenes, very little sound was present. During close-ups of the ghost Thomas, some awful grinding, squealing, and clanking noises were heard. The branch line terminates at a scrapyard. By this point, Thomas was rolling at a considerably slower pace. Slower than usually seen on the early seasons of T and F. Oddly, most of the scrap models were not the regular scrap engines seen on the show. The scrap largely consisted of broken-up road vehicles and the like. Thomas slinked into a damp siding. After stopping, a man modelled in the same style as the series proper, holding a cutter's torch, appeared, standing in front of the rusty Thomas. The camera panned down slowly whilst fading to black. After about 6 seconds, the sound of birds chirping was audible. I was half expecting the tape to take a more light-hearted approach here. I was wrong. A black on white hand drawing fell into view. It was a set of sidings with rows of steam engines that had been withdrawn from service. Having several books and magazines on British Railway in the final days of steam traction, I'm used to this sort of scenario. However, the engines were completely dilapidated. Their frames bent out of shape, various bits of the engines were cracked and dented, most things were missing like smoke box doors and buffers, and all the locos simply looked completely mauled. As I am something of a British Railways buff, I found this image to be a little upsetting, though I imagine that many people will be completely unfazed by it. If you're a long-time follower of Thomas and Friends, or you have children or younger siblings that are into the show, then you'll know there are literally hundreds of characters in the series. Even more if you count such things as the original Railway series books and magazines. This picture did not have hundreds of engines, but the choice of engines were interesting to say the least. All of them represented real engine classes, some of which formed the basis of characters that weren't yet created. For example, there was a North Staffordshire battery electric locomotive, fairly little known until 2012 when it was brought out of obscurity by serving as the basis for the character Stafford. Even more bizarre was the inclusion of two Manning Border L-Class tank engines. Any fans of the series will know that Billy and Charlie are both based on this engine class. Other engines were not used as a basis for any Thomas character. For example, the London, Tilbury and Southend Railway Class 79. This engine class normally sports a Westinghouse pump as seen in the linked image. The drawing showed the pump to be missing, however it had not been torched off, but rather appeared to have been just wrenched off, leaving a gaping hole in the smoke box. There were similar holes in the engine's boiler, and in the middle of the picture was Thomas himself, barely recognizable. His smokebox door had been broken right off, as had most of his cab and external parts. Some of his wheels were missing, his side rods were removed, and what little paint that had remained on the dilapidated, hole-ridden body shell was almost completely faded and skilled by rust. As for sound, the chirping birds played throughout the showing of the drawing, about 27 seconds in total, along with the unmistakable sound of a Black 5 whistle. The whistle was long and drawn out, lasting for the whole showing of the image and still trailing after the image had faded to black. It would seem that the recording was from an engine that had been taken out of steam and was being drained of steam, ready to be broken up. This made the image all the more unsettling. Partway through, the whistle almost begins to sound pained. I've always been somewhat unnerved by static captions or images, especially if they're not accompanied by any text or music. I've never liked static TV idents used to signify the death of a royal family member, for example. This was no exception. The imagery in the soundtrack didn't help matters either. After a while, the whistle began to get a bit staticky. The image showed up for a split second, but now with a black on red color scheme. It was not blood red or anything, but rather a perfect red you expect to see as the default red for old editions of Microsoft Paint. The red quickly faded to a more brownish yellowish hue before fading away completely. Unfortunately, since then, the tape has been worn out to the point where no clear image can be made out anymore. My original theory regarding early reel that was not meant to be as a pitch, but as a test episode written and directed by David Mitton to see how much action and violence would work in a Thomas episode. Note that the show's 5th season contained more violence and crashes. It was the first to consist entirely of newly written material not written by the Audrey family, who had written the Railway series books. I assume that the incredibly violent scenes, not suitable for a children's show, were likely added simply because the video would never go public, so they didn't have anything to worry about things being too violent or scary. It may be worth noting that earlier in 1981, on the 8th of March, a train in Argentina traveling to Buenos Aires crashed into a pair of derailed trucks at Branson Partido. This could be a coincidence, but it also could be a way of continuing the Audrey's tradition of basing accidents in the series off of real-life events. Prior to the tape wearing out, I contacted Britt Alcroft, David Mitton having passed away several years back. She was curious how I got a hold of the tape, and it had been missing for about 30 years. She confirmed to me that David Mitton did not have any input in the film, but it was written by a caretaker at Clearwater whose name had escaped her. But she believed that his last surname was Richmond. This employee had a grudge for David Mitton ever since they were teens, but the reason behind this has not been confirmed. Some believe that during education he felt that Mitton was finding ways to make him fail all his courses, depriving him of a future. It is not known that this may have been done, though Mitton was a distant relative of the head of one of the exam boards at the time. Richmond was certain that Mitton had a hand in making him fail and swore revenge on him. Britt believed that Richmond created the short film with the intent of passing it off as Mitton's work, in an attempt to get Mitton sacked as a means of revenge. I told her that I received the film in a job lot of old Red Thomas tapes, some of which were dated prior to the show's launch in 1984. It turned out that the eBay seller was called Richard Almond. Britt was uncertain whether this was the Richmond fellow, but told me to contact her if I found out any more news. I then watched the film one last time for clues. I was actually surprised to see there were some secrets I had not seen before. At the big station, there were advertising posters for Richmond cigarettes. I was unsure whether or not this was a coincidence, but I decided I'd contact Britt Alcroft once I watched the whole video again. I got to the scene where Thomas couples up to the trucks. On closer inspection, I could make out markings on the truck closest to Thomas. It was text that read LDM 160508. I wondered what this meant, so I did some research, only to realize that David Mitton passed away on May 16th of 2008. I wondered what the LDM would have stood for, before I realized that the DM would have been David Mitton, and due to the date of his death written on the truck, the L would have probably stood for late. The following truck had an even more interesting message on it, 100794, which was the number written on it, which happens to be my birth date. Another number combination was written on the same truck, NOB23S3. I was initially puzzled before realizing that Book 23, Story 3 of the Railway series is called Escape. The climactic crash near the end of the film is likely to be where more secrets lied. I paused the tape and advanced frame by frame. For a split second, I saw a frame with a black background and nothing but a date in a plain sans serif font. It said 4.12033. Several seconds in the film later was another freeze frame saying, "Doom is inevitable." I couldn't find anything more but was interested in what I had. I tried to contact Britt Alcroft only to find that she had stopped using her old email and begun using a new one, which I was unable to find. And no one else knew what it was either. My theory is that some of the film is by Mitton. I believe the original synopsis would have been as follows. Thomas backs down on a goods train. He takes the train down the line before realizing he's been switched to the wrong track. He then crashes but survives in one piece. Percy then arrives with the breakdown train to lift him back onto the rails. The Richmond fellow probably added in bits after, such as the writing on the truck, which I imagine was a reshot scene because convincing enough effects weren't easy to come by in the early 80s. The screams of Thomas's crew into the story Thomas, as well as everything that played after the copyright notice for obvious reasons. The thing that perplexes me is the phrase, "there's nothing quite like it." The original motto of the Northwestern Railway in the RS books is in Latin, "Nil unquam simile." Is it possible that "there's nothing quite like it" was a proposed slogan or catchphrase for the TV series? Sounds better than confusion and delay at any rate. The way scrap engines are used in this film are interesting to me. Many times in the series we see the engines go through scrap yards, even encountering scrap locos looking just like themselves, but the characters looking as cheery as ever. I don't believe that what was said in the tape is going to happen, but hey, if I die on January 4th, 2033, then I'll take back what I said.